There we go. Man, he almost had a chance. Oh no. Oh no. How is this allowed? Man, I think it was a really close fight, and he almost had me that time. But yeah, we were just better.
Kill me.
Hey guys, I'm back, and I'm sure you've seen the new patch already, and there's been some pretty ridiculous builds so far, right? I mean, there's Spirit Healer, which is bugged right now, which is massively buffing turrets and summons to do way more damage than they should be doing. But what if I told you I found a new build that is not a bug, that is just pretty much almost as ridiculous as that? So it's going to take advantage of the bottom feeder mutator. So this mutator right here was added in the new update, which is when this weapon runs out of ammo, it gains infinite ammo for 5 seconds. As I'm sure you've seen so far, you can see that I'm abusing the hell out of Spore Bloom with this thing. Not to mention that it get an extra 7.5% damage for every 20% of reserve ammo missing. If I'm missing all of my reserve ammo, that's 5 times 7.5, or 37.5% extra damage. So this is just such an incredible mutator. Now it's only a 5-second burst, but as you can see, the amount of damage you output is outrageous. But right before we get into it, let me just say, I hope you enjoy this kind of video. It's a little different from what I normally post, but if you do, it'd be much appreciated if you could like and subscribe. So to start with, let's start with the things that didn't change. So because I did do some minor changes throughout the different fights to tailor it to each encounter. But to begin with, Hunter, always running Hunter's Focus and always running Bulletstorm. And honestly, you don't need to run these skills. Like, this mutator is not dependent on Hunter Gunslinger at all. You can, if you really want to run Challenger, run Challenger. If you really want to run Alchemist and Frenzy Dust, that's a pretty solid option too. So there's no need to run these two, but these two are the ones that will give you the highest damage. Now, I think another important part of this build to talk about is that you're not stuck to using this on Spore Bloom. There are other very viable weapons that bottom feeder can work towards. Granted, you want single shot weapons for the most part. You can maybe get away with, say, a coach gun, but realistically, if you're not using Spore Bloom, you'd be using Widowmaker. You can fit in whatever else there is that you want to fit in, and it will work. Spore Bloom is definitely the best option, but it's not the only one. So run whatever you enjoy. I think it should be noted that while this build absolutely shreds, there are a few bosses it doesn't work against. For example, anyone with an invulnerability phase like Mother Mind, or if you have like a big phase change like Nightweaver or Annihilation. But other than that, pretty much everyone will just get destroyed by this build. Wow, even Venom is easy this way. This is ridiculous. So over the course of this build, I used a couple different rings and amulets. For the most part, I stuck Abrasive Whetstone in the whole time because all of the bosses I did fight were bleeding. But other options, if the boss you cannot fight is bleeding, Ankh of Power is always just a great basic option. If you really want to do the crit, you can maybe do Butcher's Fetish with your heavy charged attack if you want it. Or you can use the Shielded Heart like I am right now and use Energy Diverter for the crit chance as well as damage dealt. But it's not too important. Abrasive Whetstone is the best out of them all though, for sure. Now for the rings, to start with, let's go over the weak spot rings. So Zanya's Malice is incredible if you can get consistent weak spots or even like somewhat inconsistent weak spots. Zanya's Malice is probably your go-to in that scenario. Another great option, if the boss is consistently weak spottable, you definitely want to be running Ring of Flawed Beauty. You'd probably run a setup looking something like this, Now for the crit rings, we have Probability Cord is a great one. Akari's Warband is a great one. If the boss is not weak spottable, then you would run something like Burden of the Gambler and maybe Stone of Expanse, or you could switch Stone of Expanse for targeting Jewel. Like you have options that you can switch between. But obviously it's conditional on the boss. And here's a great example of a boss that has no weak spot and it doesn't even matter. And remember, all these fights are on Apocalypse. Like, these guys have a lot of health. This boss even had the Hardy modifier, and he's just gone in, like, less than 10 seconds. No weak spot, no problem. Now, for your Relic and Fragments, I also varied that a little bit. I did the Shielded Heart when I needed a little bit of health just so I could tank a hit in the fight. In one of the fights, I also used the Enlarged Heart just because it's really quick to use, and that means at the beginning of the fight it takes a little bit less time. It's really not important though. You can slot whatever you want. And then for your fragments, I was using fire rate because you want all the fire rate you can get because you only have 5 seconds of this burst damage and you need to maximize it and get as many shots off as you can. So that's beautiful. Mythic ranged crit damage, great, because you should be critting as much as possible. This is one of the most important stats in the build, and then crit chance is probably the only more important stat than crit damage in this build. And that's because you gotta be critting to take advantage of your crit damage. So there's that. You could run weak spot. By the spreadsheet I was using to calculate some damage, as well as my tests, weak spot is inferior to any of these options. And here's an example of you being able to just shoot at range, because a sniper shotty is a thing if you equip targeting jewel and manage to be able to hit a weak spot. It's disgusting damage. It's supposed to be the shotgun with the worst spread in the game, and it can still pull this off. Now let's talk other weapons to help optimize this. So obviously you have your main weapon and you're going to put bottom feeder on it, right? But what do you want to use to support it and maybe top up your damage even more? So as I said earlier, I'm using Abrasive Whetstone, so I want Twisting Wounds on my secondary to bleed the target and then get the amulet's effect, as well as Corrosive Rounds, because an extra 10% damage sounds good to me. Not going to turn that down by any means. I picked this on just a really high fire rate weapon, so if I did miss the weak spot, there's a really high chance that at least one of my shots crit and proc Twisting Wounds. The other optimizations we can do to this build will involve our consumables. So for example, rocket fuel is great because it'll increase our fire rate by 10% for 20 seconds base, but if you have the potency trait, it'll be longer. Most of the time throwing Brightstone grenades are actually slow, so they're not often worth it to end the fight as quickly as possible. But then one other concoction that is almost necessary, I would say, is Tranquility Font. It's not strictly necessary because Hunter's Focus does so much work to reduce gun recoil, spread, and reticle sway, but Tranquility Font is just a 35% reduction to all of them, and like, why not if you have access to it, right? And to just quickly go over your traits, like, these honestly don't matter too much. The only one that I will say is particularly important, or the only two, are handling, because you need your weapon spread and weapon recoil to be as low as possible with Spore Bloom, and Long Shot. It's a shotgun after all, so if you're not using Hunter, you want Long Shot. But if you made it this far in the video, thanks so much for sticking around. I hope you did enjoy. This was a ton of fun to create the build for this, and when I found out and was doing the fights, oh, that was so enjoyable. But yeah, hope to see you in the next one.